Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says Israel is behind killing of the country's top nuclear scientist Mohsen FAKHRIZADeh. In a televised address, Rouhani said Iran will retaliate at the proper time. Earlier, in a letter to UN, Tehran warned the US and Israel against any misadventures after the assassination of FAKHRIZADeh. A U.S. federal appeals court has dismissed Trump campaign's lawsuit that sought to block Joe Biden's election win in Pennsylvania. Three-judge panel ruled that charges required specific allegations and proof, none offered by Trump's lawsuit. The battleground state certified Biden's win by 80,000 votes this week. At least 7 people have been killed in a suicide attack in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Police said 10 others were wounded as the blast went off in a popular ice cream shop near an international airport. This comes only hours after U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller made an unannounced visit to the Somali capital. Coronavirus infections in the U.S. have shot past 13 million while claiming over 264,000 lives in the country. India's COVID-19 infections have topped 9.3 million with over 41,000 new cases and 485 deaths overnight. Pakistan has registered over 3,000 cases and 45 fatalities overnight as the death toll tops 7,900. Globally, the COVID-19 death toll has exceeded 1.4 million with over 61.5 million infections. And in cricket, England beat South Africa in the first 2020 of the 3-match series at Newlands, Cape Town. The visitors chased a 180-run target with 4 balls to spare and 5 wickets in hand. Johnny Bairstow was declared man of the match for his match-winning innings of 86 runs on only 48 deliveries. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, and now the news in detail. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has promised to retaliate for the assassination of top nuclear scientist Mohsen FAKHRIZADeh. In a tweet, Khamenei said FAKHRIZADeh was martyred at the hands of cruel mercenaries. Meanwhile, in a televised address, President Hassan Rouhani said Israel is behind the killing and Iran will retaliate at the proper time. In a letter to the UN, Iran's envoy Majid Taghrawanchi said Tehran reserves rights to take all necessary measures to defend its people. Revolutionary Guard Corps Commander Hossein Salami said Tehran will avenge the assassination. Military advisor to Supreme Commander Hossein Degan said Iran will strike as thunder at the killers of FAKHRIZADeh. He said Zionists seek to provoke Iran to wage a full-fledged war in last days of U.S. President Donald Trump in the office. Iranian media claims Trump has endorsed Israel's involvement in assassination after he retweeted an Israeli journalist tweet which claimed that FAKHRIZADeh was wanted by Mossad for many years. Meanwhile, Hezbollah says FAKHRIZADeh's assassination perpetrated by America and Israel is declaration of war in Iran and the region. But he said the retaliation to this crime remains in the hands of those concerned in Iran. Earlier, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged restraint as tensions flared after Iran's nuclear program's architect was assassinated near Tehran. For more on this, we are joined by Dr. Satare Siddiqui, political analyst, live from Tehran. Ma'am, what do you think Iran has warned the U.S. and Israel against any adventurous measures after killing of scientist Mohsen FAKHRIZADeh? Do you see further escalation in tensions between Washington and Tehran?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because the U.S. and the Zionist regime have given Iran every reason to show more, to escalate the tensions between the two countries. But no, because Iran acts very patiently and based on logic and long-term interest of not only its own people, but also the interest of the region. So we don't know what we are going to expect, but this won't be left without a response from Iran, because last year, in less than a year ago, Iran's top general, Sardar Soleimani, was assassinated. And now we have yet another nuclear scientist, our top physicist, assassinated. And the U.S. and Israel shamelessly and proudly take responsibility for that. This cannot be left without a response. We know that Iran is going to act, but how this is going to happen and in what manner the two countries are going to show opposition to each other and enmity to each other, this is not clear at this moment.
Ma'am, President Hassan Rouhani says Iran will retaliate at the proper time. Can Tehran strike Israeli or U.S. infrastructures in Middle East as it did in Iraq after killing of General Qasem Soleimani?
Well, the strike and the U.S. base in Iraq, as Iranian officials have also described it, was just a slap and not a retaliation for the assassination of a very important military figure of Iran, the top general Soleimani. So I don't think Iran has yet responded to that attack. And maybe we can expect some attacks on some Israeli base or some Israeli, military base somewhere. But we're not sure. We cannot say what Iran is going to do or what exactly they're going to target, because, as I said, Iran acts with a lot of composure and patience, and they're waiting for the proper time and the proper target to attack on. But what I know is that inside Iran, people are very angry, and it's not only sadness over losing, national figures. It's national figures, but it's also angry. A lot of rage and anger because state terrorism is happening in this region, and no international entity and neither the international community are taking any action. So if necessary, Iran would have to act on its own in order to restrain and limit the acts of terrorism that are coming from the Zionist regime and its lords in Washington.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satara Siddiqui, for your time. And now moving on to U.S. Federal Appeal Court has dismissed Trump campaign's lawsuit that sought to block Joe Biden's election win in Pennsylvania. A 3-judge panel ruled that charges required specific allegations and proof, none offered by Trump's lawsuit. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals had been asked to dismiss the Trump campaign's attempts to invalidate millions of mail-in votes in Pennsylvania. Circuit Judge Stephanos Bibas, on behalf of the panel, termed free and fair elections lifeblood of democracy. Bibas said charges of unfairness were serious, but this case was without merit as no evidence was presented. In a tweet following the decision, Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis said they will go to the Supreme Court. The battleground state certified Biden's win by 80,000 votes earlier this week. Meanwhile, a recount in Wisconsin demanded by Trump campaign ended, increasing President-elect Joe Biden's victory margin. The developments have dealt major blows to Trump's attempt to overturn presidential election outcome. In another development, former U.S. cybersecurity director, has termed Trump's election fraud allegations farcical. In an interview, Chris Krebs said the allegations of foreign countries manipulating voting machines were baseless. Time is running out on U.S. president as the states have until December 8 to resolve election disputes. At least 7 people have been killed in a suicide attack in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Police said 10 others were wounded as a blast went off in an ice cream shop near an international airport. The Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab extremist group has claimed responsibility for the attack. The attack comes only hours after U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller made an unannounced visit to Mogadishu. Last week in Mogadishu, a suicide attack killed 5 people, including Somalia's military and police officials. The fresh wave of violence in Somalia has erupted after reports that U.S. plans to withdraw its military personnel from the country. Ethiopian military says it has seized the control of Vikru town near Tigrayan capital Mekelle. The military says national defense forces have taken control of the strategic locations to capture the capital. A military top official said the troops fighting against Tigray's People Liberation Front will be able to control Mekelle in a few days. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has again ruled out dialogue with the leaders of the Liberation Front. In a meeting with 3 African Union envoys, Abiy said he is willing to speak only to the representatives operating legally in Tigray. This comes after the government declared the final phase of an offensive against the Liberation Front. Coronavirus infections in the U.S. have shot past 13 million, while claiming over 264,000 lives in the country. India's COVID-19 infections have topped 9.3 million, with over 41,000 new cases and 485 deaths overnight. Globally, the COVID-19 death toll has exceeded 1.4 million, with over 61.5 million infections. More on coronavirus in the following report.
Coronavirus situation remains grim all around the world as the holiday season is expected to propel the next wave of infections. Latin America's Peru, with one of the highest COVID-19 death rates in the world, has signed a deal with Pfizer to secure over 23 million vaccine doses for around 70% of its population. With the daily infections rising in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said majority of the country's population will be vaccinated by September next year.
We've been collaborating with the Canadian Armed Forces and their logistical abilities for a long while now, and that's why I'm so pleased to announce Major General Denis Fortin, who is going to be working closely with PHAC on logistics and delivery of this greatest mobilization effort Canada has seen since the Second World War.
Europe also continues to register devastating statistics of COVID-19 cases from all over the continent. Italy's death toll remains second highest in Europe as the country reported over 800 deaths for the second consecutive day. The virus is again on the rise in Turkey as its daily death toll hits another high for 5th consecutive day. The World Health Organization has urged countries to stay vigilant even if they see a fall in their coronavirus cases.
You've heard us say this before, but we really need to emphasize this again. Do not let your guard down. It is good to see the measures taking effect and transmission going down, but it is not time to let up. And it's time to even scale up.
Meanwhile, once Australia's COVID-19 hotspot, Victoria State has announced it has gone 29 days without detecting any new infections.
In Pakistan, 45 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to over 7,900. The health ministry says more than 3,000 tested positive for the disease overnight. The ministry said there are more than 46,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 392,000 countrywide cases, more than 337,000 have recovered so far. The highest number of infections are reported in Sindh with over 170,000 cases, while Punjab has reported over 170,000 cases. In the capital city Islamabad, over 29,000 have been infected so far. In Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, protesters have called for boycott of the District Development Council and Panchayat elections. Jammu and Kashmir People's League urged the public masses to boycott the so-called elections from the oppressor side. In a statement, the league said casting vote is a treason with the blood of Kashmiri martyrs. It appealed to the people of occupied Kashmir to be aware and cautious of these new Indian political maneuverings. The National Conference and the People's Democratic Party have also boycotted the local body elections. In India, thousands of farmers have continued their protests in New Delhi against reforms they say are against their interests. The government has deployed hundreds of police and paramilitary forces at the capital's border. Farmers blocked the main highway in the capital and chanted anti-government slogans and raised the union's flag. They appeared ready for a long sit-in and refused to relocate the protest to another site. Earlier, police fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse the protesters, preventing them from entering Delhi. The farmers fear exploitation by corporations that will buy their crops cheaply under the new bill. They say the reforms prevent government from buying grain and wheat at guaranteed prices. Farmers are demanding the government to immediately roll back its decision, but it is still pushing the bill. And now it's time to take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, and I'm moving on to Belarus. President Alexander Lukashenko says he will step down once a new constitution is adopted. During a meeting in Minsk, Lukashenko said he is not amending the constitution for himself and will leave office under the reformed constitution. Lukashenko said the current constitution needs reforms as too much power has been given in the hands of the president. He pledged to conduct fair elections free from any fabrications under the new constitution. He added it will be worse if a war is imposed on the country, and the situation is better now without a war. Demonstrators protesting since the August polls have dismissed the presidential call for reform as a stalling tactic. In Chile, hundreds of protesters took to the streets of Santiago, calling on the government to bring reforms and control inequality in the country. Riot police used water cannons to disperse the demonstrators. The South American country has been witnessing protests for more than a year now. The unbending demonstrations call for reforms to pension, healthcare, and education systems. Earlier last month, Chileans voted in favor of a new charter to replace country's Pinochet-era constitution. In Brazil, people have returned to polls in 57 cities to vote in the runoffs to the municipal elections. The country has seen a surge in violence, including assassinations and attacks on candidates. Brazil's electoral authority says 200 incidents of murder or attempted murder were reported during 2 months of campaigning. In a report, it said this year has seen a surge compared to just 46 incidents in previous municipal elections in 2016. Violence has always had its place in Brazilian politics, particularly in the wild west of poor states. The violence in the country is hurting all parties as many political killings remain unresolved. Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has called for a joint effort to tackle an increasingly severe security environment. Suga made his remarks at the annual review ceremony held at Aruma Air Base in Saitama Prefecture. Addressing the ceremony, Suga said the security environment surrounding Tokyo has become increasingly severe. He stressed the significance of joint efforts to prevail in unconventional battlefields such as outer space, cyberspace, and electromagnetic fields.
In recent years, the security environment surrounding Japan is increasingly severe, and it is required to deal with areas not only in conventional land, sea, and air, but also in new ones such as outer space, cyberspace, electromagnetic fields. Under this situation, it is getting more difficult for each organization to deal with separately. It is important that we break barriers between ground, maritime, and air self-defense forces and tackle the challenges together.
Under Suga's leadership, Japan has actively sought to maintain balance in its relations with US and China. And now moving on to the United Nations Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees has warned that it is on the cliff's edge due to lack of funding. The financial needs have been compounded by the pandemic and the U.S. move of ending funds to UNRWA. More in the following report.
The United Nations Relief Agency for Palestinian Refugees is at the brink of collapse due to the non-availability of required funds. UNRWA provides its services to about 5.3 million Palestinian refugees, but it is suffering from a stifling financial crisis since the United States has frozen all of its support for the agency since January. The U.S. claims that it is not satisfied with the way the agency works, which is being criticized by Israel. Speaking at a news conference, UNRWA's Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarani says the agency is on the cliff's edge due to the lack of funding.
If you go from one country to the other one, you will meet despair and distress. And I do believe, and this is a message I am conveying to the international community, there is no better investment than investing in UNRWA and in the human development of Palestinian refugees if you want to invest in stability in the region at a time the region is as volatile as it is.
He said this year UNRWA received the lowest level of contributions since 2012. Lazzarani says the pandemic has also affected the agency's response to refugees.
This is taking place at a time our 28,000 staff have been the front responder of COVID-19 and its impact, have been the front responder of a number of crises here in the region. At the time they have paid a high toll when it comes to the COVID, including through death. At the time the communities are also paying a very high toll when it comes to the impact of the pandemic.
Lazzarani urges the international community to step up its support immediately. He also announced a call for an international conference next year to talk about the future of UNRWA. The UNRWA's Commissioner General reiterates the agency's assurance of continuing to provide services to Palestinian refugees.
At least 8 people have died in Somalia after Cyclone GATI hit country's semi-autonomous Puntland region. UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said over 42,000 people have been displaced from the region. It said GATI disrupted livelihoods by destroying fishing gear, killing livestock, and flooding agricultural land and crops. UN's Food and Agriculture Agency said the flooded farmlands can further exacerbate the already worst locust plague in the country. It said the cyclone will allow the immature desert locust swarms in neighboring states to mature faster and lay eggs. Somalia's locust plague is part of a once-in-a-generation succession of swarms driven by unusual weather patterns. A delegation of Indian Sikh pilgrims has arrived in Pakistan to take part in the celebrations of Guru Nanak's 551st birthday. Guru Nanak was born in Nankana Sahib in 1469. Sikhs across the world will celebrate the birth of first Sikh Guru on the 30th of November as Guru Nanak Jayanti. This year, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, Pakistan approved visas of 325 pilgrims. The first delegation of its kind since the outbreak is visiting Pakistan from November 27 to December 1st.
Due to the coronavirus pandemic, permission has been granted to visit only Nankana Sahib, but devotees had this desire to visit Panja Sahib, Sacha Sauda and Sri Kartarpur Sahib.
Sikhism was founded in the 15th century in the Punjab province by Guru Nanak, and he has had 10 successive gurus. Now moving on to American singer CHER has arrived in Pakistan to set up the lonely elephant KAAVAN. The elephant will be set up for a new life in Cambodia this weekend. After years of campaigning by U.S. pop star CHER and animal rights advocates, the 36-year-old Asian elephant is finally to be airlifted from Islamabad's dilapidated zoo to an elephant sanctuary in Cambodia. Meeting Prime Minister Imran Khan, CHER thanked him for making it possible to take KAAVAN to Cambodia. KAAVAN has been trained for weeks with international specialists to get him used to the small enclosure and loud noises expected on the 10-hour flight to Cambodia. Thailand's famous beach resort Pattaya has kicked off the holiday season in the shadow of COVID-19 pandemic. Amidst the cultural shows, street food and fireworks, the holiday spirit commences in full swing. More in the following report.
Thailand is gradually opening up after fighting a severe battle with COVID-19. The country has a struggling tourism-reliant economy and the holiday season calls for some celebration. Pattaya was one of Thailand's worst infected areas by the pandemic back in April when foreign tourists were banned from visiting.
After Pattaya was in darkness for a long time, now we have begun to have lights from hotels and other tourist spots around the city. Our lives are being brought back. Pattaya is returning to life. This shows that tourism in Pattaya city and in Thailand is beginning to recover.
Restrictions were lifted in October when Thailand recorded its first 1,201 foreign tourists. Tourism Ministry requires all foreign tourists to travel on special 90-day visa that requires 2 weeks of quarantine. Thailand's entry restrictions have helped keep its coronavirus cases tally to less than 4,000.
Now that we've heard about vaccine, we are a bit delighted that a vaccine is coming. We are afraid of COVID-19 too. We want everything to go back to what it used to be. Because if the situation remains like this, we cannot survive.
The country plans to restart talks with China on a travel bubble to boost the economy, which the government predicts will shrink by 6% this year.
And now moving on to the business stories, the U.S. authorities have launched an investigation into 115,000 Tesla vehicles. The move comes after the auto safety regulator received 43 complaints regarding front suspension's failure. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said the probe concerns a front suspension safety issue in the vehicles. The agency said preliminary evaluation targeted 2015 to 2017 Model S and X vehicles. The agency said Tesla issued a service bulletin in 2017 saying a manufacturing condition can result in front suspension failure. Earlier, the agency said it was expanding a separate probe into about 159,000 Tesla Model S and X vehicles. China says it will introduce a total ban on the import of any solid waste starting from the beginning of 2021. This comes in a notice jointly issued by the Environment and Commerce Ministries. The notice said breach of the law may entail criminal liability. It said any import of solid waste will be stopped and the storage. The notice added recycling of foreign solid waste on its territory will be prohibited from 2021. For its industrial development in the 1990s, China increasingly needed raw material, forcing the country to accumulate large solid waste. But since 2017, China has begun to ban the import of some types of solid waste to improve the environmental situation. In cricket, England beat South Africa in the first 2020 of the three-match series at Newlands, Cape Town. The visitors chased a 180-run target with 4 balls to spare and 5 wickets in hand. South Africa managed a total of 179 runs on a loss of 6 after being put into the bat first. Faf du Plessis top scored for the Proteas with 58 runs on 40 deliveries. In reply, England were 3 for 34 when Johnny Bairstow came to the rescue. Bairstow was declared man of the match for his match-winning innings of 86 runs on only 48 deliveries. The second 2020 of the series will be played in Pearl on Sunday. One more member of the Pakistan cricket team has tested positive for COVID-19, taking the overall infections tally to 7. 6 of the 53 members of the group had tested positive for the coronavirus upon their arrival in New Zealand. The New Zealand Cricket Board has already revoked Pakistan team's exemption to train in quarantine. It will remain on hold pending consideration by health officials, which is expected to take until next week. The first 2020 is slated for the 18th of December at Auckland, while the last test will be played at Christchurch on 3rd of January. And now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.